Hi, I'm Will. It's just me again this time, and, well, let's just get right into it, shall we? So this is Super Ecksdee Panic. As mentioned in a prior video, this game was made in only 30 days and is completely nonsensical. Our player character here is named Killix, and due to the curse of some witch or another, Killix and friends have been turned into, as the readme says, chibis until they eat magical eggs. As you'll see in just a moment, these magical eggs are actually a gameplay element of sorts. You start every level as Chibi Killix with a very sluggish move speed and short jump. Transforming into human Killix will increase the character's max speed, increase jump height, and allow Killix to, as the game says, get weapon. And yes, that is a clip from Half-Life Full Life Consequences, and we're all about those vintage memes here on this channel. There are a variety of weapon in the game, some of which clearly reflect the games this was inspired by. I mentioned in the video on Jade Phoenix that there was a bit of inspiration from Mega Man and a bit from Mario, but Super Ecksdee Panic goes all in on these two games, especially Mega Man. There are some obvious aesthetic details that link this game to Mega Man, such as the health bar and music pulled from a few Mega Man fan games, but there are some more deep elements too, like the fast-paced boss design and discrete enemy layouts that sometimes respawn when you leave them alone. At the same time, the game features a decent recreation of the mustachioed plumber's weighty momentum and ability to jump on enemies' heads, and Killix's run cycle is based on that of Mario from the original Super Mario Bros. In fact, Strife even brought back some of the camera design from Mario as well. As Killix moves left and right in more open areas, the camera will pull ahead to allow the player to see more in front of them. It doesn't do so to an exaggerated degree, but it's enough that no threat ever catches the player off guard. So, I've brought up some things that tie Super Ecksdee Panic back to its sources of inspiration, but it does of course bring its own unique formula to the table. Instead of the levels in Super Ecksdee Panic being these sort of linear gauntlets with challenges that gradually get harder, they tend more toward being open horizontal spaces with multiple rooms. In these rooms, players face small challenges and collect items called droplets in order to unlock the boss room. There are 6 full stages, which is pretty impressive for a game made in 30 days. Each level has different bosses, enemies, and visuals, and the total runtime for a deathless run of the game would probably be somewhere around 40 minutes. So now that we've got all the tiers we need, we're going to go ahead and enter the boss room. And before we actually fight the boss, I'm going to pause the game real quick, because each level in this game actually has a unique line for its pause, which is pretty cute. Anyway, this boss is pretty easy. It's weak to the feather type weapons, so if you just keep hitting it with that while you stand in the corner, it dies basically right away. And that's that. And then it turns into a cat, which I guess is the chibi form of that particular boss. And that's the first level. Befitting Super Ecksdee Panic's classic heritage, we get a score bonus, and we also have to get these little puzzle pieces in each level, which are used to unlock the true ending. So this is the second level, and I'm actually going to be skipping around it a little bit because I'm not a big fan of it. I'm just going to highlight some points of interest, and then we'll move on to the third level. These ticking owl bomb enemies here are actually based off of a similar penguin-like enemy from Jade Phoenix. They're not the only things that were brought over from Jade Phoenix, so it's kind of interesting to see that sort of crossover. So this fire crab guy here will give us the fire weapon for beating him. Normally you don't have to do this with just the jump, but fortunately every mini-boss in the game can be beaten with just the jump. That's an option, so yeah. Now if I move a little bit over to the right here, we're going to see one of these toaster enemies, and actually if I knock it off, instead of propelling toast, it will bounce up and down using toast, and I actually think that's pretty cute. In case you're ever short on funds by a single droplet, you can actually grab the droplet right there in the HUD, and it'll count as collected. You can even see how there's a hole in the ceiling left just so that's possible. It's pretty cute. So we're just about to head into the boss room, but I'd like to highlight the bouncy gel stuff I just passed over, because that motif kind of carries over into the boss fight itself, which I think is kind of cool. So now that we've got enough tiers, we're going to deposit all those, and now we're going to hop into the boss room. So yeah, fitting with the gel motif, the boss itself is sort of a gel-based creature of sorts, and will even shoot a gel weapon-like substance at you. The fight itself isn't really very interesting. Each boss has a weakness, and in this particular case, I didn't actually bring the weakness with me. The weakness this boss has is the feather weapon, and I elected to skip that because I'm a doofus. Otherwise, this boss fight is pretty basic, so I'm just going to skip over to the end. Oh, and I didn't show it in the recording, but the unique pause text for this particular level is, I think, coffee break. And that's level 2. We've now added another chibi to our ranks, and thus we move forward. So this is level 3. Its design is sort of like a bigger version of the first level. The hub, if you will, is sort of a long corridor, and there are tons of doors that take you to all sorts of little mini-challenges. I think this is a pretty interesting choice. For games that have collectibles as the main focus, you would generally expect that the player would have to move both vertically and horizontally quite a bit. By contrast, Super Ecksdee Panic has almost exclusively horizontal level design. When I asked Strife about why this was the case, the answer he gave me was basically what I expected, which was, one, that he really didn't feel like programming vertical camera movement, and also that the horizontally moving camera was more reminiscent of classic Mega Man. This little mini encounter we have with the Stomper enemy in order to grab the egg is kind of interesting. We could backtrack a little bit to let it pass over us, but if we do that, it'll destroy some platforms that we need to get the puzzle piece later. So this ice cream enemy is the slime mini-boss. Each weapon has a mini-boss corresponding to it, and for this one it's slime. In order to hurt this cheese grater stomper enemy guy thing, we actually can't jump on his head. We have to hit him with a weapon. So I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to grab this brain bleach here. So this level's theme is sort of a mix between a music level and an ice level, and both those themes separately are pretty common for platformers, but together I think that they make an interesting sort of mix. The music theme is used for a little secret that we can see here in the background of this room, and also in order to give us these little flute holes that we can jump up with. And instead of the ice theme being a standard sort of excuse to have really obnoxiously slippery platforming physics, we get these ice blocks, which are used to gate off progress until we get the fire weapon, which is pretty cool. The only problem I have with these ice blocks is that they don't reappear once they're destroyed unless you die, which can be a problem if you destroy that little bottom ice block that I'm about to jump to right here. This is compounded by the fact that when you die, you lose all the droplets you're holding, and the amount that you have in the little bank that allows you to open the boss door gets cut in half. For me, that particular element makes Super Ecksdee Panic less enjoyable than I think it really could be. It's already a pretty backtrack-filled game, and forcing the player to go back and recollect old tears if they die makes the game even more backtracky. And then there are a few extra things on top of that that make the game even more repetitive. If you get a game over, which means losing all of your, as the game calls them, mans, then what happens is you have to start the level that you're on from the very beginning. Fortunately, you don't lose the puzzle pieces you've collected up to that point, but when it comes to collecting puzzle pieces, you do have to do that all in one go. The game offers a password system, but it doesn't save the puzzle pieces you've collected. That can be a pretty arduous task, especially if you're not already familiar with the game. In spite of all that, I still do think that Super Ecksdee Panic is probably Strife's most polished freeware game. The visual style is crisp and clean. It's not, amazing to look at, but it does look fine enough. It's easy to read details. Enemy design is varied, and level design is fairly varied as well. The sound is always clear and readable, and so on and so forth. Now, I mentioned that there was a secret, a music-based secret, earlier in the level, and we're going to use this little keyboard here, to get the epic weapon. And the epic weapon is good for killing enemies, and good for killing mini-bosses, and good for a few specific other things, but it's actually probably not the best option for killing bosses. While the epic weapon is long range and it has a straight projectile, so it's very easy to hit things with, it doesn't deal double damage to any of the bosses, except maybe the final boss, and I wouldn't know because I haven't tried it, because honestly, well, you'll see why. Anyway, now that we're fighting this guy with goofy looking Sonic hair, I figure now is about as good a time as any other to mention the fact that all these characters, both the bosses and Killix, are actually not designed by Strife, they're designed by friends of his. And the main reason for this was just because he didn't really feel confident in designing his own characters at the time. As for the gameplay side of things, this boss is probably my favorite in the game. The way that it shoots out flames means you always have to keep moving around, you have to stay on your toes, and you have to be jumping at all times. And that makes for a very dynamic fight, even though it's a little bit easy. And that's level 3. I could say nothing here, but the amount of dead air between the boss getting killed and the next stage starting is just too much for me, so I'm gonna keep talking right now. And, okay, here we go. So this is level 4, and the level design is sort of similar to level 2's, but it has some differences. Once we get to the far right of this area, right here, we're going to enter a doorway that's going to take us to a sort of back room almost. And once we get into that particular area, we can go all the way left, and then we'll be back at the beginning of the level. So there are sort of 2 layers almost. And then of course we're also going to see a few new enemy types. These guys, when we kill them, they drop a few droplets, but they also give us a fire weapon. And these guys right here, the little dragons, you might recognize from the video on Jade Phoenix. You actually can't jump on their heads, I guess because their wings are dangerous or something. So instead we get to see another sort of Mario-esque property of this game, which is that you can deal damage to things by hitting them from below. This is signposted fairly effectively by the fact that Chibi Killix has a little spike on their head, and normal Killix has very spiky hair. The balloons that we see in every level kind of work in tandem with that idea to help solidify it. Anyway, most of this level at this point is going to be grabbing the egg and then backtracking, so I'm going to skip ahead to near the end. So now we're back in normal Killix form, and as you can see we still have the epic weapon. In fact, as long as we don't game over, we can hold onto this thing for the rest of the game. Of course we can't use it as Chibi Killix, but it's still useful. The mini-boss we're fighting right now is the Shuriken mini-boss. It drops the Shuriken weapon, which we are going to pick up on accident, but we're not actually going to use it for quite a while. My goal in this playthrough was to hold on to the epic weapon for as long as possible, which may have actually been a bad idea in retrospect, because the Shuriken weapon not only deals double damage to this boss here, but also makes the boss much easier to hit. Nevertheless, this fight is relatively easy, doable anyway. The only issue I have with it is that it took me quite some time to realize that she fires bolts downwards if you happen to be standing under her, and the reason it took me so long to realize that is because the bolts blend in very well with the background. In fact, in spite of my best struggles, I'm going to actually end up dying to this boss, so let me skip ahead to a more successful attempt real quick. And this boss turns into an eye-searingly blue rabbit. There's not really any rhyme or reason to these transformations. Now with that boss taken care of, we have just one more friend to rescue. And that boss is located in what is probably the most frustrating stage in the game. For multiple reasons, actually. For example, that cheese grater enemy we passed under just now. If we happen to die as normal Killix, we'll get sent back to the beginning of the stage, and that guy becomes basically unpassable, which is pretty frustrating. Of course, you can kite him for a little bit, or you can just run right through him and take the damage. But it's pretty annoying to have that bit of pace slowing right there at the beginning of the stage every time you die. In addition to that, if we didn't have the epic weapon, we'd have to go back and get a slime weapon from the door just behind us. The slime mini-boss is pretty difficult to kill without taking any damage, so it feels like another instance of forced damage. Add to that the fact that this level offers a pretty minimal amount of meaningful freedom in its level design, and it makes it a bit of a chore to replay. In fact, it's so much of a chore that I'm kind of tired of looking at it, so I'm just going to skip ahead to some more interesting parts. So this is a pretty amusing bug right here. A lot of games have this sort of bug where they have conditional collision for things that aren't on the screen, so that sort of thing can happen. So this room feels a bit like something out of a Mega Man ROM hack. We get kind of a pseudo puzzle here where you have to stand on the edge of platforms in order to not fall off them when you use the switch. This isn't much of a puzzle, and I don't really think it's meant to be, because you can only use one switch at a time, but it's enough that it kind of slows the pace of the game and gets you to do some more precise platforming, which is worthwhile, although it's a bit annoying that the ceiling counts as a solid object. So we're just about to get to the end boss for this level, and his weakness, the feather weapon, is right there in front of the door. I'm not really sure what the point of that is, but oh, there it is. Of course, we have chosen to stick with the ultimate weapon, through sickness and through death. Or wait, no, it's through sickness and through health. Anyway, point is this guy's a chump, and by a chump, I mean he's actually probably the hardest standard boss in the game, so gotta be careful with him. He knocks down these platforms, and I think now would probably be the best time to mention that in the original release of Super Ecksdee Panic, falling into bottomless pits actually was an instant kill, like most standard platformers. Of course, after Strife received many complaints about that, he eventually changed it, and I definitely think that that's for the better of this particular game with the way the level design is structured. Now, of course, at the end of this already quite hard level, there is a second phase to the boss fight, and I think his weakness is feather as well, I'm not actually sure. Anyway, this boss's design is standard, but functional. He periodically shoots out 3 different kinds of projectiles. One is just a laser that goes downward, another is a sort of laser that causes a wave along the ground, and the last one is a fist that allows the player to get some elevation and hit the little jewel on top of his head. This boss isn't very hard, but he is beefy, and I'm just gonna skip ahead to where I win, okay? And there we go. Easy. If I'm being totally honest, I think the epic weapon is probably least useful against this guy. The flame, slime, and shuriken weapons can be aimed at the jewel pretty easily, and of course the feather weapon takes out his beefier health bar much faster. Actually, you know guys, it's been a while since our last hilarious meme. I'm about to go into meme withdrawal. Oh, thank goodness. Okay, let's see here. What are the symptoms of meme addiction? Wow. That is unfortunate. What are we doing again? Oh, right, the game. So, a witch calls us, and she says that our eggs are gone, and so we fly away on the Star Guy. I don't really know how that works, but I'm not really willing to question it, so... So this is level 6, it is functionally the final level of the game, and I'm going to be fast forwarding through most of it. The enemies here are all just enemies we've seen before in previous levels. Of course they are remixed into brand new layouts, and sometimes these layouts are nice, but a lot of the time they can be a bit annoying in the name of difficulty. Real quick though, I wanted to pay some specific attention to this frog guy right here, because his design is echoed in one of the levels in Freedom Planet that we haven't seen yet. So a lot of the obstacles in this level are made up of combinations of obstacles from previous levels, and I think this is a really good way to kind of round out the experience. The only problem is that some of these obstacles can end up feeling kind of slow because of the way they're made to feel difficult. As well as that, the mini-bosses are also repeated, and they are not changed up at all, unfortunately. So fighting them again feels a bit sluggish and a bit repetitive, especially because these mini-bosses themselves are filled with little tiny wait times that really kind of stack up over time. This all compounds in a sort of unfortunate way with the general structure of the level, which is sort of a loop shape, and if you happen to take the path toward the loop and don't realize it, you'll get stuck because it's a one-way loop and you'll have to go all the way through the level again. And then there's also this jump off this bouncing toaster right here, which if missed twice, means you can't actually get up to that puzzle piece right there and you have to kill yourself to try again. If this level had a checkpoint structure like the other levels in the game, that is to say, no checkpoints whatsoever, then I would call it a failure outright, but fortunately that's not the case. If you reach a specific point about halfway or so into the level and then die, you are not only restored to that particular point in the level, but you're also given 54 droplets regardless of how many you had when you died. That single decision alone makes this level way less tedious than level 5, so I'm very grateful for that. So after that heart-wrenching cutscene, you'll notice that the theme music for the game doesn't play here like it does in the other victory screens. Of course, while I am joking around, I do sincerely think that this sort of attention to detail definitely goes some way to allow games like these to keep a consistent tone as they are moving from scene to scene. So of course this small level right here is just a check to make sure we have all the puzzle pieces. If we get to the end of this hallway and we don't, we get kicked back to the title screen. And as you can see, I'm having trouble with this jump here, and yes, if I missed that jump in the first version of Super Ecksdee Panic, I would have been killed. So it's a good thing that changed. So I'm going to pause for just a second. That room that you just saw there, that is a boss rush room. If you go into one of those doors, it leads you to a boss, and that makes sense. The thing is, the epic weapon, like I mentioned before, isn't very good for fighting bosses, but there's more to it than that. If you happen to get the epic weapon and take it this far into the game, you're actually kind of handicapped, because when you pick up a weapon in this area, after you beat a boss, its slot is replaced with Brain Bleach, which is the game's healing item. So basically, by taking the epic weapon this far, you make yourself unable to get any healing items as well. Now, my very first run-through of this particular area was done during this recording, so I didn't know that. So unfortunately, I game overed, lost the epic weapon, so on and so forth. All this is to say, I'm gonna go ahead and skip to the final boss right here. So we're now into the final boss of the game, and this witch character here has spawned a barrier of flames that we have to get rid of in order to damage her. Other than the fact that we need to destroy this barrier to get to her, it's actually quite helpful just to get rid of it so that she doesn't throw it at us. This fight is pretty easy. The main thing that can catch you up is that line of flames that she throws out. It seems like you might want to jump over it when you're first playing, but it's actually best if you run toward the witch when she fires it off. As for the weapon that is best for this, I'm pretty sure it's the shuriken. I can't really think of a better weapon for this. The arcing ones would probably be a bit of a pain, and the line ones would be a huge pain, I'm sure. And of course, there is a second phase to this boss fight. I did actually die a couple times to it, but with the power of editing, it's like it never happened. So this boss is kind of flawed, but pretty fun. She has 3 basic attacks. One is that she spawns a ring of flames, which expands outward. Another is that she fires a cone of flames downward. And another is that she rushes at you, like this. The rush attack isn't very threatening at this point in the fight, but we'll get to a point where we start going a lot faster, and then the rush attack will be the thing that kills us most of the time. So I like the fact that this is a scrolling boss fight. Obviously moving boss fights have been done in games before, but because this is the only one in the game, it helps it to feel unique. Using that carton of brain bleach for reference, we can tell that this stage that we're on is actually looping, which is useful because it means that we can save that brain bleach until we actually need it. Currently we're doing pretty okay, but again, the boss will start speeding up at some point in the fairly near future, so we're gonna want it then. And with the last third or maybe quarter of the boss's health remaining, she speeds up to actually a kind of difficult to manage speed. This is where the rush attack really becomes a pain. Because the screen is moving so fast and the dragon is so close to you, you have basically no wiggle room to see whether or not there's a bottomless pit ahead of you. Of course, you don't die instantly to bottomless pits, but with that one ledge with a sort of lip hanging out over it, it's possible to get stuck under there and get crushed against the dragon. As a result, it sort of feels like you have to memorize some of the features of this looping stage to cope, and that's kind of annoying, but otherwise the boss fight is pretty fun. The motion of the circling flames requires some thought to jump over consistently, and the general speed of the fight is very dynamic. Anyway, with all that out of the way, we've finally won the game. Yay! And that was Super Ecksdee Panic. It's lacking in polish in some areas and perhaps could have used a little bit more playtesting, but ultimately it's incredibly impressive that this game was made in 30 days by just one guy, even if he had some help along the way. To me, this is Strife's first truly good game, and after years and years of trying, it only makes sense that practice would eventually get him here. In fact, I'd even go so far as to say that even though I'm not a huge fan of this game itself, I find its existence and the amount of content and the polish of it very inspiring. As I was working on this video, I finally caught my spark to work on games again, and I think that that says something in and of itself. I often find that I have difficulty committing to large-scale projects over long periods of time, but this game illustrates that it's very possible to create lots of content over a small period of time, as long as you're dedicated enough. And then once you've done that, what's stopping you from creating something huge over a long period of time? Perhaps I just find this game so inspiring because I know what comes after it, but I've participated in 30-day events before, and frankly, few games have impressed me as much as this one. Anyway, that's enough of my spiel. Next time we'll be looking at Christmas Time Heroes, which was another Jam game, but this one created for a competition. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.